Good morning and welcome. Welcome to the Nigeria's Fiscal Sustainability Imperatives, Impediments, and Options. It's my pleasure to welcome you all. My name is Taiwo Oyedele. I'm the Fiscal Policy Partner and West Africa Task Leader for PwC, and I have the honor to be the Research Director and Commissioner for the Fiscal Policy Roundtable. I'll be your moderator for today's session. Just a quick run through of what we have today. We are starting right away with the opening and welcome. After this, we'll take special remarks from Mr. Asue Igodalo, who is the chairman of the NESG, and Dr. Pauline Basinga, who is the country director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We'll then show you a video that we call Better Task Video before we get into our panel discussion for today, where we're going to be looking at issues around fiscal sustainability, imperatives, impediments, and options for Nigeria. We will then spend some time taking questions and answers. Thank you to those of you who have put forward answers even before now during your registration process. We will try as much as possible to answer as many questions as possible. For those who have not been able to put forward their questions, you have the opportunity to do so using the chat function on your YouTube platform as the session progresses. Again, we'll pick up your questions. Please make them very clear, make them brief, and straight to the point. Once we are done with the questions and answer session, we move on to what we call our call to action to make sure that this is not just a talk show, but a program that will make a meaningful impact. Before we then close, with a closing remark from Dr. Suleiman A. Indanusa, who is the co-chair of the Fiscal Policy Roundtable. Altogether, this session is estimated to take about 2 hours. So welcome once again, and thanks for joining us. I will now introduce, for the special remark, Mr. Asue Igodalo, who is the chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, to kindly give us his remarks in about 5 minutes. Over to you, sir.
Taiwo, I thought I had 10 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My special welcome and thanks go this morning to His Excellency, the Governor of Ekiti State, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, the Honourable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, Mr. Mohammed Nami, the Executive Chairman of the FIRS and Chairman of the Joint Tax Board, and Jesmin Rahman, the IMF new mission chief to Nigeria. I welcome you all, and I welcome everybody that's on this platform. And I thank you for joining us. Over the years, it has become clear to us at the NESG that to further fortify transparency in governance and substantially increase government revenue, diversify our revenue base, enhance growth, and protect our economy from its vulnerability to external shocks, we as a country had to substantially improve our fiscal space and design, approve, implement focused fiscal policy and regulatory reforms. The NESG, working through its Fiscal Policy and Planning Thematic Group, had done some work in this regard and continuously made recommendations to government. But it was also very clear that more detailed capital-intensive studies and research had to be undertaken. The findings from such studies had to be structured into well-articulated and workable recommendations for reform. And the recommendations had to be carefully discussed and worked through with government and accepted by the people. Such detailed work requires substantial financial support. The imperative to carry out this work coincided with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's commitment and willingness to expand its focus areas for public sector intervention to include the financial sector. Accordingly, on Thursday, March 15, 2018, the NESG, in full collaboration with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, inaugurated a private sector initiative, the NESG Fiscal Policy Roundtable, which we fondly call the FPR, to carry out the needed detailed studies and research work and intensify the required advocacy and interventions for improving the Nigerian fiscal space. The FPR comprised of 10 world-renowned, intellectual, research-oriented, professional, and administrative leaders who are our fiscal commissioners. The FPR was chaired by Dr. Mrs. Sarah Alade and co-chaired, former DG of CBN, I beg your pardon, and co-chaired by Dr. Doyin Salami, a world-renowned economist and an economics professor at the LBS. However, very shortly thereafter, both our chairpersons were appointed into high government office. Dr. Alade became the special advisor to Mr. President on finance and the economy, and Dr. Salami became chairman of the Economic Advisory Council. Thankfully, Dr. Suleiman Danusa and Professor Mrs. Teju Shomorin stepped into the role of chairpersons of the FPR. In the 2 years of existence, the FPR supported the Nigerian government's ongoing efforts by providing clear and actionable homegrown policy reforms to increase government revenues and define better fiscal policy proposals to the various tiers of government, complementing all of the technical work earlier done by government and by the World Bank and the IMF. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the boom-bust cycles and recessionary trends in the Nigerian economy, its impact on government revenues, the fiscal challenges faced by many governments, which have restricted their ability to fund critical development programs, and the economic and social consequences of the ongoing COVID pandemic have fully justified the establishment of the FPR and our urgency to find lasting solutions to increasing tax revenues in a manner that is fair, transparent, effective, and efficient. To fundamentally increase Nigeria's fiscal space, tax policies, laws, and administration needed to be addressed, and the composition of the government expenditure needed to be critically assessed. As part of its work, the FPR reviewed the tax structure across the various tiers of government and conducted a nationwide tax perception survey. We at the NSG believe that the FPR has made substantial, effective, and positive recommendations and have contributed to the fiscal processes, which will translate into improving our fiscal space. Some quick wins already implemented amongst the many preferred recommendations include the enactment of a finance bill alongside the timely passage of the 2020 budgets, the upward and equitable reset of VAT, and the institution of favorable revenue thresholds for enterprise tax eligibility to optimize the cost of tax collection and ease the burden of taxing the poor. On behalf of the NESG, I thank most sincerely the Honourable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, for her immense support, willingness to collaborate, intellectual confidence, willingness to discuss, share, participate, accept, and implement. We also thank the Honourable Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, Mr. Clem Agba, for his unflinching support. Before I close, I would like to thank and sincerely appreciate this distinguished set of patriotic Nigerian professionals and leaders who diligently and freely gave of their time, intellect, and resources to serve on the FPR. I thank Dr. Suleiman A. Ndanusa, the former DG of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Professor Mrs. Teju Shomorin, who's the first female professor of taxation and former executive of the FIRS, both current and co-chairs of the Roundtable. I'd also like to thank Dr. Mrs. Sarah Alade and Dr. Doyin Salami, who were the previous chairs and co-chairs, for the wonderful work they did when they were on the FPR. I thank Taiwo Oyedele, who's our host today, who's our research director for the FPR and the partner in the PwC. Dr. Obadiah Malafia, Fiscal Commissioner at the FPR, former Deputy Governor of the CBN, and Chief of Staff of the 80-member African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States based in Brussels. I also thank Mrs. Onyeche Tifashe, who is the current CEO of Siemens Nigeria, and Oluseun Onigbinde, founder of Budget. It will be remiss of me if I don't thank my predecessor in office, Kiari Buka, who started this and worked extensively on it, also as a commissioner. We cannot thank you all enough for the service you have preferred in advancing Nigeria's fiscal policy governance agenda. Our most sincere gratitude goes to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for their continued support of the work of the NESG. Without their financial and resource support, we would have been unable to carry out such detailed work. We thank you. We duly appreciate your social, health, and economic interventions in our country. I thank you all for attending and welcome you to the closeout session of the FPR. Thank you. Thank you. Taiwo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, our able chair. Since you thanked everyone, I think it's just fair for us to thank you too for the excellent leadership you're providing. We appreciate you so very much. We'll move on very swiftly. You're welcome. And now I'm going to invite to give us special remark, Mr. Basinga.
Thank you very much, Taiwo. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to once again be part of the NESG Fiscal Policy Roundtable. This roundtable is particular, for me, because it was launched 2 years ago, exactly the day of my birthday. So if you know the exact date it was launched, that is my birthday. So I'm super excited to be part of this discussion today. The Roundtable is really a notable platform that brings together key stakeholders and leaders in the private and public sector to discuss and dialogue on future of the Nigeria economy. While the NESG has played an important part of the policy debate in Nigeria for the past 25 years, the value of this platform is most relevant and important today, particularly during this critical time. At the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with a philanthropy built on people and partnerships, we recognize that policy dialogues such as these are really important and catalytic in accelerating and supporting Nigerian development goals. The foundation works in close partnership with Nigeria federal government and state government, civil societies, the private sector, and development partners across key priority issues. And those include health and nutrition, agriculture and food systems, digital innovation and data, financial inclusion, and human capital development. And across all our program, we really take a gender lens to really integrate gender into all those programs. We recognize that for Nigeria to accelerate its human capital development, it needs to get out of the current low revenue, low public expenditure equilibrium that Nigeria found itself in. Therefore, in addition to the work we are doing across these key priority issues, we have been growing our investment in supporting Nigeria public finance system for the past 5 years, as the chairman said earlier on. And that work has been really in close partnership with NESG and also with the Nigeria Governance Forum. Through our partnership, we are supporting the government at both federal and state level with evidence and technical support to address its revenue challenges. Our work focuses on mainly three broad areas. I'll be quick on that. So the first one is really blocking revenue leakages by leveraging technology to strengthen tax administration. The second one is around improving tax compliance by employing innovative programs to strengthen the social contract. And the last one being unlocking new revenues sources through policy-focused research and facilitated peer learning across states and countries like this one that we are witnessing today. We cannot ignore the fact that the world has drastically changed in the past few months with the current COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the lives of citizens here in Nigeria and across the world. I would, however, like to take a moment to commend the leadership of the government of Nigeria and the immediate and concrete steps taken during the initial outbreak. The relative low figures we are seeing in most African countries are perhaps testament to the effectiveness of early lockdowns, as leaders have noted, or possibly to other factors as well, as such as the age structure, prior experiences in infectious disease management, like the experience of Nigeria managing Ebola, polio, etc., and potentially other factors. One thing that I would like to, it's very clear that we can, agree on is that looking back, the lockdown are causing massive economic hardship and food insecurity. And also the focus on COVID has made that providers and patients fear of contracting the COVID infection. That has really impacted the delivery of routine health services. We are seeing that less patients are going to use primary healthcare services, and that's threatening increasing morbidity and mortality. The new reality is that business cannot go as usual. These pressures have left most African countries really struggling to tackle a triangle of trade-off decisions in a shrinking fiscal environment. The three things that governments are really struggling with is whether to meet the health challenge of COVID-19, managing socioeconomic impact, and also ensuring maintenance of routine health services. To this end, the foundation is supporting the federal government and state government, both directly and through our partners, to address key challenges and mitigate the impact of essential health services. And then also helping the economy to continue running and ensuring that overall a strong response to the pandemic is put in place. Our main priority and objective are to continue to support the government in maintaining the resultant trade-off triangle that is clearly evolving, balancing the COVID response amid increased economic and fiscal pressure, and ensuring that health services is not compromised. Ultimately, we need to ensure that the government's ability to provide adequate services for its citizens continue to remain a priority. And financing human capital should continue to remain at the forefront of policy and dialogue, with a view to build a stronger system in the long term that will really make sure that any future shocks are really sustained. Now, let me talk about some great news that we received last week, and you've all heard about it. It's about polio. I would really like to congratulate Nigeria on its successful presentation to the Africa Regional Certification Commission last week. This is a fantastic milestone for the polio program in the country. Now that we need to wait for a final decision from the Commission on whether to declare the entire region as free of polio. This will be the 5th of the 6 WHO region to be declared polio-free. Left will be Pakistan and Afghanistan, but we cannot let our guard down, because polio anywhere is a threat everywhere. And there is an history of polio, especially white polio, moving from Asia to Africa. So the effort to end polio is not over. We have to make sure that all remaining polioviruses everywhere are eradicated, and we need to maintain high population immunity through strengthened routine immunization and campaigns. And we have to invest in good surveillances. The COVID pandemic has really told us that making sure that we have a very good surveillance really paid off. I would really like sincerely to thank the Honourable Minister of Finance and Budget and National Planning and the chair of an NGF for their fantastic role that they both play in this fight. both in terms of country financing investment. Nigeria has always put money to fight polio, and also making sure that the political commitment is there throughout. When the governors, got involved, and the traditional leaders and communities, this is when we started seeing really the move. Nigeria has lived up to its promise to its children to make this world polio free. Now we all need to keep it up. Now the COVID crisis provided an opportunity to accelerate the process of developing a robust health system with the capacity to withstand future shock, with a special emphasis on primary health care. Accelerating the implementation of critical programs such as the Basic Healthcare Provision Fund, the health insurance, will help states continue to deliver of basic life-saving intervention as we manage the impact of COVID. The Government of Nigeria Economic Sustainability Plan, which focus on retaining and creating jobs and increasing productivity of smallholder farmers and other local actors, is very encouraging. This provides an opportunity also to connect them to digital financing services, and thus maximizing their chances to move out of poverty. I would like to conclude by again commending the Nigeria government, development partners, and the private sector on the collaborative effort in overcoming this pandemic. I would also like to appreciate the work of NESG and the Fiscal Policy Roundtable in leading a much needed national conversation on tax and services. Through its work, the NESG and its Fiscal Policy Commissioner have made important contribution to how we understand citizen attitude and perception on Nigeria fiscal policy. I hope that NESG will continue to build on these important gains, and after it concludes on the work of the Fiscal Policy Roundtable. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation will continue to be a partner to NESG, continuing to really support this. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. And that was Mr. Pauline Basinga, who is the Nigeria Country Director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We thank you and we appreciate you for the excellent work you're doing for Nigeria and indeed for the rest of Africa and for the world. Thank you very much. We will now move on to our panel session. But before then, I'm going to try and share a few perspectives with our participants today before we invite our panelists. And that is a little bit about the Fiscal Policy Roundtable. Essentially, the need for this is as a result of the Nigeria's fiscal system. And we all know all the issues to do with low tax to GDP ratio, rising debt, debt service to revenue ratio being very high, Nigeria's overdependence on oil, and so on and so forth. But this is not a program or a conference to point fingers. So at the Fiscal Policy Roundtable, our approach is how can we work with government in a collaborative manner to solve Nigeria's problem. So the Fiscal Policy Roundtable has been around for over 2 years now, with the sole objective to provide evidence-based insights to be able to help government with revenue mobilization, expenditure efficiency, and fiscal sustainability. So we indeed conducted a national survey with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And this survey we conducted was to essentially look at the perception of Nigerians towards paying taxes. And this was also complemented by a study conducted by the World Bank about large firms. And we have started a series of advocacy engagements since the survey was conducted. I'll spend a few minutes to show you and talk to you about the findings from our study. So this study was conducted in 2019, last year, based on data available as of 2018. And I need to mention that the study covers all the states across Nigeria. We had survey administered to 10,000 adults and households, 5,000 small businesses. In addition to that, we had focus group discussion in the 6 geopolitical zones. We were trying to establish the tax morale of Nigerians, which is essentially your willingness to comply with taxes and the belief that evasion is wrong. We found out that for Nigerians, this is extremely low. Most Nigerians don't pay their taxes, and those who pay, many of them do not pay correctly. It was very surprising for us that only 17% of Nigerian adults believe that evasion is wrong and punishable. For households and individuals, it means therefore that about 83% either believe that evasion is not wrong or it is wrong but understandable. For businesses, nearly 70% do not see anything wrong with evasion. The question was, why would that be the case for Nigeria? Nigerians told us that it's because, one, they do not trust government, and they also do not trust tax officials. The most untrusted level of government is local government. And they said that they are not satisfied with public services, from electricity supply to water supply to health and education. Nigerians believe that government should and can do more. They also said that the tax collection process can be complex, sometimes unprofessional and corrupt. 1 in 3 adults in Nigeria said they were asked to pay a bribe in the process of wanting to pay their taxes. And Nigerians said that there's just too many taxes, multiplicity of taxes, particularly at the local government level. They also said that policy formulation sometimes does not take into consideration input from stakeholders, and Nigerians don't feel that their voices are being sufficiently considered. Also, political interference, policy inconsistency, and high frequency of tax audit by multiple agencies of government are some of the issues cited, particularly by businesses, both small and large. Interestingly, Nigerians are willing to pay their taxes if government will use the money to provide social services. For individuals and households, their 2 top priorities are healthcare and education. For businesses, the top 2 priorities for them are electricity and security. We also spoke to tax officials to balance our story. And they also have a lot of challenges, including inconsistency of government policy that makes their job more difficult than it needs to be, limited resources to be able to accomplish their mandates, and often unrealistic targets that are not based on data, for which they have not been resourced and empowered. And in addition, they also have concerns around political interference, not allowing them to do their job professionally. So we had recommendations as a result of these findings, which we put into 5 broad buckets. 1 is social exchange. Government needs to try and demonstrate to the people that taxpayers' money is indeed working for taxpayers. Simplicity is, how do you simplify the tax process from the law to administration and to policy? How do you also communicate and engage with taxpayers, those in cities and those in villages, using multiple channels in the languages that they understand? How do you build capacity to support the tax authority to do their job? And most importantly, how do we ensure transparency and accountability so we can raise the level of trust that Nigerians don't seem to currently have between them and their leaders? So we're going to watch in a few minutes, maybe for about 2 minutes, what we call better tax video. And this is us at the Fiscal Policy Roundtable going around Nigeria to find out from Nigerians and the ordinary people on the street what they think about paying taxes. Watch. It seems we are having challenges with the audio. All right, I think we should move on. Okay, thank you very much. I think apologies for the quality of the video. Internet quality, it's always a challenge for events like this. But the good thing is that you'll be able to find a copy of this video on the NESG platforms, whether you go to the website or on social media. So, and we encourage you to watch the video. It's just about 2 or 3 minutes, but it tells a story about how Nigerians feel about paying taxes. All right, so now we're going to move on and continue with the panel discussion. And it is my honor and pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Governor Kayode Fayemi, who is the Executive Governor of Ekiti State and the Chairman of the Nigeria Governors Forum. You're welcome, sir. And also to welcome the Honourable Minister for Finance, Budget and National Planning, Dr. Zainab Ahmed, who is ably represented by Dr. Sarah Alade, who is the Special Advisor to the President on Fiscal Matters. You're welcome, Madam. And to welcome the Executive Chairman of the FRS, who is also the Chairman of the Joint Task Board, Mr. Mohammed M. Nami. You're welcome, sir. And also to welcome, last but not the least, Jesmin, Rahman, who is the IMF Relationship to Nigeria. Welcome to all our panelists. We're going to start off by allowing each of the panelists, to speak for about 5 minutes in terms of your perspective and in terms of your views regarding the tax system and the fiscal space in general, and maybe also in reaction to some of the findings from our study at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group Fiscal Policy Roundtable. Can I kindly ask His Excellency, the Governor of Ekiti State, to please start? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oyedele. Let me also thank the NESG leadership, headed by my brother, Aswe Godalo, as chairman, and all the other members of the NESG have been responsible for putting this fiscal policy roundtable together. For us at the Nigerian Governors Forum, the NESG has been a very, very credible partner that we've worked with on a wide range of issues of governance, including economic development. And coming down to the question of tax and its imperatives for fiscal sustainability, it's an area that we have worked quite closely with the Federal Ministry of Finance, the NESG, and also Mr. Basinga's organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we've seen some significant traction over the last 4 years. With the assistance of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we've set up our IGR dashboard at the Governors Forum, and this IGR dashboard has also assisted us working with the Joint Tax Board headed by Mr. Nami now, and the Ministry of Finance, to focus on sharing experiences, knowledge on building a consensus around tax reforms. And this has become even more imperative within the context of COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the Nigerian economy. So for us, we believe that we cannot continue to depend on federation returns, especially now that federation returns have significantly gone down. By our own estimate, at least 30% reduction from 2019 to 2020. About 800 billion naira is going to be yanked off federation returns to states. And that fiscal hole has to be provided for. We have to figure out how to ensure that we tackle the gap that has existed in light of these challenges. And that is happening. If you look at the improvement that we've witnessed in state IGR from, if you like, around 800 billion collectively in 2017 to about 1.3 trillion in 2019. Of course, there's a wide range of differences from state to state, but the general point to make is that there is a sustained improvement in IGR, either in terms of making the most of the experiences that we're sharing, ending double and multiple taxation, blocking leakages, looking for new areas of tax sources, and basically being more efficient and transparent in our tax collection regime. All of that is taking place in the context of the pandemic and in the context of the reduction in resources available to us. And what we've had to do, even in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, is to develop a crisis response plan, estimating the financing gap that the pandemic has occasioned, and revising our IGR projection, which has also gone down in light of the emerging macroeconomic realities, as well as also looking for better ways of relating to taxpayers within the context of these tough times. You would have noticed the number of things that we're doing in terms of broader reforms, health insurance, harmonizing right of way charges, and also building a stronger relationship with FIRS and the Joint Tax Board. So for us, there's no question that this is the way to go. But we also have to understand the realities that was painted by that survey that you did, that our people's perception of tax payment is still warped. And the way to correct that is to ensure that the citizens can see the direct correlation between tax payment and utilization of internally generated revenue in our states. And that's something that the states are focusing on under the auspices of the Nigerian Governors Forum. But let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We're just on point, five minutes. So thank you for keeping to time. I would invite Dr. Sarah Lade to please share her thought representing the Honourable Minister for Finance, Budget, and National Planning, particularly with regards to debt sustainability, both during And of course, if you're talking about sustainability, it has to be that it goes beyond COVID-19. So over to you, ma'am. Okay, madam.
She's
Okay,
still
so
muted.
I'm muted. Sorry. Okay. I just started by saying the chairman of NESG and chairman NGF and executive governor of the Ekiti State, chairman FRS, the IMF country rep, and Bill and Melinda country representative. Thank you very much for having me. I will be, let me start by apologizing on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Finance, who is unavoidably absent. She had really wanted to come, but last minute, there was another assignment from the villa, so I will be representing her. I'll be just talking briefly about we'll be talking about the sustainability plan and other issues. But let me say that many of the things that characterize our economy had already been identified by the fiscal roundtable. And low revenue is something that we have to grapple with. Low revenue, even before COVID, we have high debt, revenue that is largely dependent on oil alone, and foreign exchange that comes largely from oil. And then we have all the other things, high debt, service ratio, weak infrastructure base, low human capital, and so other things. Now, come COVID in 2020, we already had these weaknesses in the macroeconomy, and now we have COVID rapport. Now, we have been hard hit by the dual reality of COVID and the drop in oil prices, and even our response to COVID also caused a lot of problems. So the importance, many things we would have loved to do, we cannot do because of revenue. But what we are doing, we know we will be able to do better if revenue had been much better than what we have. Now, due to the global economic slowdown and then the oil revenue that we have, I won't go through all that again. What we are expecting is a GDP that will contract in the best case scenario of about 4.4%. And in a worst case scenario, it might be above, it might be contracting, with about 8% or more. So we are in a very difficult situation and expecting that this contraction, what we are trying to manage now is to make sure that the contraction does not go too deep and not for too long. And it is possible. We are also expecting that maybe about, if nothing is done, up to about 21 million jobs could also be affected by the impact of the pandemic. So with all these kind of statistics, we cannot overemphasize the importance of raising revenue for the government. Now, before I end, I'll just go briefly into the key fiscal measures which the government has taken to be able to, to be able to confront these situations that we have. One is the what the federal government has done in terms of economic sustainability plan. We know that His Excellency, Mr. President, established 3 structures to achieve the goal. And we have the Presidential Task Force on COVID, you have the Crisis Management Committee, and then the Economic Sustainability Committee, which is under the leadership of His Excellency, the Vice President. And they have developed a 12-month economic sustainability plan to mitigate the effects of post-COVID recession. while ensuring social stability and addressing long-standing economic vulnerabilities in line with the ERGP. I will not go through the plan since I have only 5 minutes. So what I just want to end up with is talk about the fiscal measures which we have taken. Measures to support the private sector, which includes implementation of our Finance Act 2020, aimed at supporting MSMEs and support to strategic industries affected by the pandemic. The establishment of an 86 million intervention fund for health infrastructure, and conversion of World Bank Regional Disease Surveillance Systems Enhancement Program to support COVID-19 interventions in the states. Accelerating infrastructure developments is one of the things we're doing. Preparation of a fiscal stimulus bill to provide legislative backing for the fiscal stimulus packages that we have. Deregulation of the price of refined petroleum products. We know how important that is given the amount of money that we spend in that area. The adoption of financing plan for the power sector recovery program has also been one of the outstanding issues. Incentivizing the use of up to 2 trillion of pension funds for roads and housing development. Supporting and encouraging states to achieve state fiscal transparency, accountability, sustainability, and other World Bank program actions in order to assess external support. And we are collaborating with state governments on affordable mass housing. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve all this, we will have to mobilize external funding and seek debt relief. We continue to engage with multilateral and donor agencies to assess additional funding for crisis response. We seek moratorium from official partners on some of the loans that we have, and support arrangements to secure commercial debts relief. If the revenue had performed, then we probably will not be seeking this much support from external sources in terms of loan, adding to loans and so on. So the revenue mobilization, which the fiscal policy roundtable had worked on, is something that is welcome. And we know that we cannot but keep working at generating more revenue so that the economy can be the better for it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Madam. I'm aware that His Excellency has to leave around 12. We'll try and see if we can go around the panelists and then ask a couple of questions to His Excellency before he takes his leave. So I'll invite the Executive Chairman of the FRS and the Joint Task Board, Mr. Muhammad Nami. Please make your remarks in about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Taiwo. Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon already. Good afternoon. Is it afternoon? Good morning. The chairman, NESG, His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Ekiti State, my brother, Dr. Suleiman Danusa, and our competent task class captain, Taiwo, Oyedele. Nobody is contesting that with you. You remain the class captain as always. On behalf of management, staff, and board of FRS, I would like to thank the NSG for this webinar conference and the opportunity given to FRS to deliver this, for me to speak on behalf of FRS and the Joint Task Board. Because there's no time, we'll just quickly go through the initiatives we've taken to support to both staff, taxpayers, and the collaboration we've been receiving from the regulatory agencies and the supervisory ministry, that the Ministry of Finance. So my presentation is going to center briefly on one, what we have been doing to ensure ease of doing business or ease of paying taxes in Nigeria. When I came on board, I think the first thing I did was to decentralize tax clearance issuance process. As you are aware, before now, application of tax clearance certificate, particularly for the last taxpayers, were hitherto processed and approved for taxpayers as far as in Abuja, but that has been taken off. Now tax controllers can now approve, process and approve tax clearance irrespective of the turnover of the company. So this has improved significantly the ease of doing business by taxpayers because they do not need to travel far to get a tax clearance certificate going forward. We also have deployed technology for purpose of automating tax payment processes, particularly the automation covered. The first step we have taken is indirect taxes, which is VAT and stamp duty. The thing we also have done to support taxpayers is the segmentation of taxpayers based on turnovers. The current segmentation is as follows: as the earlier, the last taxpayers from 1 billion and above, as it was not before, is now from 2 billion and above. The median tax offices, which used to be 200 million and below 1 billion, is now from 500 million to below 2 billion. And then the micro and small taxpayers now from 0 naira to as much as 500 million naira. We also have made effort to entrench professionalism in the system. The management of the service as a result of this succeeded in setting up a structure that is guided by professionalism and probably competence of each of the staff. So what we are doing going forward is rewarding professionalism. So if a target is set for you, if not for the COVID-19, the negative impact of the COVID-19, and to some extent because of your attitude to management of staff-related issues, taxpayers issue, you are not able to meet up your target. What we have done now is to say, okay, come, maybe you go back to training school, because we tie your promotion, we tie a lot of things to KPI going forward. Now we have also decided to deploy technology, because you all bear me witness that as a result of because of the impact COVID-19 has in the way we do things, we cannot afford to sit today and set taxpayers or visit taxpayers in their offices to physically interact with them. So what we have done is to deploy technology so that issues like VAT, VAT, and all these things can easily be, their payment can easily be done by taxpayers, even at the comfort of their houses. Secondly, that has made monthly and annual tax returns easier, because taxpayers can now file tax returns right from the comfort of their offices. They can equally make tax payments online without necessarily visiting us. We have also, part of what we have done was to boost the morale of taxpayers. What have we done is to open certain telephone lines, dedicate certain telephone lines to taxpayers. We have also made it easy going since I assume office for taxpayers and their consultant to even speak directly with my management team, particularly engage me as a person on each issue that confront them. And to further support them also, we issue some palliative measures. Immediately, President Muhammadu Buhari announced the lockdown that affected Lagos, Ogun, and Abuja. What we did was to say, if you are able to pay your tax, you don't necessarily need to bring any document to our office, so that even if you are not able to file online because of certain difficulty you're having, because nobody expected the lockdown, the late returns penalty that ordinarily that the taxpayer is supposed to pay for filing late was waived by us. We also extended date of remittance and filing of VAT to the last day of the month instead of the 21st as that is allowed by law. Taxpayers who are currently facing difficulties for purpose of filing or of paying their taxes, which ordinarily should be paid in foreign currency, we have allowed them to now pay in Naira using investor and exports Forex window of the CBN.
Okay. I don't know if we can just try and wrap up in about 1 minute so we can get to His Excellency before he leaves, and then we can come back to you later on.
Okay, the key one that we also did that has supported the taxpayer seriously is the suspension of failed audit, investigation, and monitoring visit till we eventually lifted the suspension. Waiver of penalty and interest on additional liabilities arising from DEX review, audit and investigation had also been suspended if you are able to pay your taxes up to the arrears due from you by 30th of June this month. So to enable you attend to His Excellency, I think I should be able to stop here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. If you can just please still spare us about 5 minutes. Is that okay, sir? Okay. Okay.
I can't.
Thank you. So,
it's not possible. I have 1 minute because I have to run.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's fine. I'll just ask you one question from the questions we have, if you can quickly take that, and it's to do with the lack of trust between Nigerians and the government. Just to get your take on this, and what is government doing, particularly at the state level, to address this problem of trust?
Well, there's really no magic one to it. There's nowhere in the world where people adore paying taxes, if that's the measure of the trust. However, ours is a little bit more challenging because of our entitlement mentality. We all suffer from it, and your survey makes that very clear. On the part of the leaders, we have to keep working on ensuring that the resources generated from the people are appropriately utilized, and the communication plan around it. And you talked about that in your survey as well. The communication around it must really draw very strong correlation between internally generated revenue and the development agenda of government. There is a strong perception, rightly or wrongly now, that whatever is generated is either to set the personal interest of those in charge, or is really on frivolities. And I think that's where the challenge lies. We need to make sure that where governance is responsive and responsible, the tendency to pay more taxes is likely to be on the increase. Second, if we block leakages effectively and the revenue generated is set aside for specific initiatives that can be regenerative, I believe our people too would pay a lot more attention to payment of tax. But the general resentment towards tax payment is not unique to us. And the general challenge of trust between the governed and the governors is a perennial challenge. It's one that we have to keep working on. And I believe that the best way to get out of it is also to ensure that those that we vote into office are those who have a very clear plan, a manifesto that we can hold them accountable to, and measures that clearly are actions that are clearly measurable by the citizens. If we do that, and we do not limit it to just those who are able to satisfy us on the short term, we're likely to get over this. But it's a marathon. It's not going to stop overnight.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. You actually hit the nail on the head on some of our recommendations from the study, and also from what we are getting and hearing from Nigerians, even with our revalidation of the survey. What we're going to do is, there are a lot of very interesting questions for you, but unfortunately we can't get to them. We'll compile them, as well as the findings and the recommendations from this conference, and for that,
I'll be happy to respond to them.
Governors Forum, if you would oblige.
But I'm sure the Director General, Mr. Oyedele, the Director General of the Governors Forum is also on this webinar. And
okay,
he may respond to some of the issues that you're raising. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much. I'll move on quickly now to the next panelist, and that is Jesmin, Rahman, who is the IMF Mission Chief to Nigeria, to kindly share her perspective with us in about 5 minutes, particularly what is it that we can learn from the rest of the world. Over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be in this distinguished panel. I will focus on Nigeria's fiscal vulnerabilities and reform options for expanding the fiscal space. So let me start with some vulnerabilities. The first vulnerability comes from having very low level of fiscal revenues. Total revenues at 7% of GDP is less than half of sub-Saharan Africa's average and far lower than the average in oil exporting countries. It is also lower than the minimum threshold of 12%, which is considered necessary for government to provide an enabling and growth-enhancing role. Interest payments take up a large share of revenues, leaving little resources for everything else. This year in particular, all of federal government's revenues are expected to be spent on interest payments. This is particularly staggering when we look at how little is spent on education and health. There are sort of two risks from these low levels of revenues. First, debt servicing capacity is low, but more importantly, there's limited funding for important spending such as health and social assistance. The second vulnerability comes from limited buffers. Nigeria has had about 3 decades of experience in implementing various oil stabilization savings funds. However, attempts at oil revenue savings have been plagued by contested legal frameworks and governance issues. Nigeria's sovereign wealth fund is among the lowest in the world when we compare it to the size of the budget or population. This limits fiscal policy space to navigate shocks like the one we are currently in. A third vulnerability comes from fragile risk perception by foreign investors. Investors tend to view oil price and sovereign default risk as very closely related. What this means is that during episodes of oil price drop, which are purely exogenous shocks, fiscal is squeezed on two fronts: lower revenues and higher borrowing costs. A fourth vulnerability comes from central bank financing of fiscal deficit. Fiscal financing in recent years has relied more heavily on central bank borrowing, including overdraft, as you can see in this chart. In 2019, CBN overdraft covered more than half of fiscal financing needs. The extensive use of overdrafts to finance fiscal deficit hampers monetary policy as it necessitates costly mopping up through open market operations, and also raises doubts about the central bank's commitment to lower inflation. So those are the main vulnerabilities. Let me now move to policy imperatives to increase fiscal space. Without a question, in case of Nigeria, the first order of priority is to raise revenues. To raise revenues beyond the minimum threshold necessary for government effectiveness, Nigeria needs to move on multiple fronts. The first of those fronts would be efficiency front. Both VAT and CIT efficiencies are much lower than peers. Strong efforts in recent years have increased the number of registered taxpayers, but the percent of active taxpayers remain low, seriously hampering collection. This is exactly where policy needs to focus. In the case of VAT, the absence of a tax threshold until recently, extensive exemptions, and absence of effective taxpayer segmentations have contributed to low collection, in addition to very low rates. For CIT, despite having a very high rate of 30%, efficiency is low due to widespread use of tax holidays and exemptions, which are suboptimal compensation for a difficult business environment, as well as weak cross-border tax coordination. The second imperative would be to complete revenue administration reforms. Here is a pyramid laying out the foundation of strong tax administration based on cross-country experience. If you look at this, Nigeria lags in some of the basic infrastructure, such as establishing taxpayer identification numbers, reducing exemptions, effectively segmenting taxpayers so that we can go after each of these specific segments with specific strategies. Measures approved in the 2019 finance bill are very welcome, but these are really the stepping stones. Efforts need to be sustained for a very long period of time if revenue gains are to materialize. And a third priority would be to raise trust in public institutions to improve tax morale, something that we have looked at in today's seminar earlier. Tax is a contract between the government and citizens where payment is in return for services. As such, the perception of public institutions, services, and accountability are very important. Worldwide and in sub-Saharan Africa, countries that rank the highest in terms of control of corruption and good governance are also the ones with higher tax morale and collection. Fiscal transparency and accountability is very important. In the case of Nigeria, it is particularly relevant for the management of oil resources. Over time, fiscal revenues from oil production has been halved from nearly 70% of total production value in 2006 to 35% in 2009. If people have a feeling that revenues from oil, which is a natural resource and belongs to everybody, is not safeguarded or properly channeled, it dents their confidence and incentive to pay taxes, particularly when they see large gap in social indicators. It is thus absolutely paramount to improve transparency and accountability, particularly in the oil sector, if Nigeria is to boost tax morale and public trust in fiscal institutions. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of pointing, and you managed to do that in a few minutes. So very useful, particularly the insights about what the challenges are and what we can do differently. I think what I'll do now is to try and see if I can do a round of questions to the panelists. And I'll start with Dr. Sarah Alade. And my first question to you is that from our study, Nigerians feel their voices are often not heard in formulating government policies, and also sometimes implementation and getting feedback from Nigerians to refine those processes and policies. If you can just please share with us, what structures do we have to make sure that whatever level of engagement we're having with Nigerians is institutionalized? And it's not someone who feels like talking to Nigerians today and someone tomorrow might feel like it's not necessary. If you can share that with us to be able to address these concerns.
Thank you, Taiwo. I think the government is committed to ensuring that citizens have access to information. And in 2016, the country joined the Open Government Partnership. I'm sure many people know about that. And we developed a national action plan aimed at deepening and mainstreaming transparency mechanisms. And part of that national action plan, it had 4 thematic areas, like promoting fiscal transparency, access to information, anti-corruption, and citizen engagement. If you look at the area of fiscal transparency, there's now, we do open budgeting, the MTEP, the budgeting issues. So the citizens have an opportunity of seeing what government is doing. They also have opportunity of contributing. There's a lot of stakeholder engagement that takes place, even in the process of budgeting, in the process of preparing the long-term plan that the ministry is doing now, and some other things that the government does. Then you recall that Nigeria also has a Freedom of Information Act. We have it, it's still there. People have access, or people can request for any information that they like. So these are all ways of doing, and I think judging by we have one of the freest press in this in the world. Our press, whether social media, normal media, could say anything. They could come up and say it the way they like, and whatever they do. So we do have access. Citizens can be heard. There's a lot of avenues for engagement, and they could talk. They could air their views. They can also engage with government the way they like. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for that. I think, we always get better. At least it's good that we have some structures, and Nigerians would want those to work even more effectively. So we have to keep thinking about how do we make them even more robust. The chairman of the FRS, one of the findings from our study is that Nigerians think that tax officials are corrupt and the tax compliance process is too complex. I'd like to get your views on this. Do you agree? And what are you doing about this?
Thank you, Mr. Taiwo. I think the accusation about corruption, as far as the public, as far as Nigeria is concerned, is not limited to Federal Inland Revenue Service. It's about throwing a question at why this thing at the public servants of the country. It is not equally completely correct that FIRS and probably its staff are completely justifying that fact that we are correct. The first thing I think I want to share with you is the efforts we are making to ensure that we change that perception. And that is the first thing we have done by ensuring that we deploy technology, because if you have, it's not just an FRS staff or a public servant. If you can separate somebody from having fiscal contact with the national resources. I think that is the first thing to do. The second thing we're doing is to ensure that we educate the staff to say that whatever revenue that is being has got nothing to do with you, is for federation, and that federal account is owned by the three-tier government. Above all, I think what we're working on now is the whistleblowing framework, which I think I've discussed with you at the time, and we are also collaborating with relevant stakeholders like Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, the EFCC, and the Nigerian police. So I think we are doing something differently this time to ensure that that perception about FRS from Nigerians is changed. And I think everybody can see it from what we are doing of recent. The FAC meeting that was held just Tuesday, Wednesday last week justified that, despite the fact that we are passing through a very challenging or a critical challenging period of COVID, FRA was able to still contribute about 68% of what was shared at FAC. So I think these narratives are changing for good.
All right. Thank you very much for that. I think, it's important to always highlight that there's no country in the world that is corruption-free. But also, if a lot of Nigerians are saying that they encounter corruption and being asked to pay, bribes in the process of paying taxes, some of it could be perception, some of it could be real, but we need to address both. But also to mention that the study was not focused on the FRS alone. It was also state, internal revenue services, and local government. And in fact, from the research finding, the highest level of corruption that Nigerians reported happened at the local government level. So thank you very much. It's good to know that the FRS is trying to do something about it. I'll move on now to Ms. Rahman. And the question I'm going to ask you is, I really like the way you made your presentation, and you're very pointed at some of the issues. But it seems like Nigeria has been taking sometimes a step forward, then we're stagnant, then sometimes we take one backwards, and we're still just hovering around 6% tax to GDP ratio. Is there anything Nigeria can learn from the experience of other developing countries on how to successfully and sustainably mobilize higher domestic revenues?
Thank you. Actually, let me start by saying that domestic revenue mobilization is a very, very challenging task. Our colleagues at the International Monetary Fund looked at what happened in sub-Saharan African countries a couple of years ago, using a data set of 44 sub-Saharan African countries during 2000-16. They found only 6 episodes of sustained revenue mobilization in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're talking about 3-year episodes during which non-resource revenues in percent of non-resource GDP increased between 2.5% to 8%. So that just tells you how difficult and daunting the task is for everybody. So what do these episodes have in common? 3 things. Countries tended to experience robust growth during these episodes, not necessarily an acceleration, but strong, stable growth for these episodes, which emphasizes the role of tax buoyancy. It is hard to make revenue gains when you don't have growth. Most of these episodes also coincided with overall macroeconomic reforms, and they constituted a range of multi-year revenue administration and tax policy reform agenda. In many of these cases, they also overlapped with intensified IMF engagement in the form of lending, non-lending, and a lot of technical assistance. There was also a set of critical base reforms in place in these countries before these episodes took off. In that sense, the episode sort of intensified or deepened the reform rather than starting the reform. And the third common factor this episode had is that everywhere there was strong political will behind these fiscal reforms. So that's kind of some of the lessons. The focus everywhere was on two things: to build a tax base and modernize tax administration. To broaden the base, all countries adopted measures to reduce tax exemptions by canceling or suspending certain tax exemptions, revising investment codes, or eliminating distortions in VAT, making changes to VAT thresholds to either reach high value taxpayers or small businesses. And to modernize the revenue administration, countries focused on core functions and developing the ICT system. This involved customized service and segmentation for different taxpayers. So ICT reforms are very important, as the first director mentioned. So I would say Nigeria has already embarked on some of these issues. It would be important to keep the momentum and stay engaged, until the full process is finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Two very important takeaways for me is expand the tax base and modernize the tax system. So thank you very much. I'm going to take one more round of questions before we go to questions from our participants. We have about 30 minutes more for the panel session before we take Q&A. And I'd like to go back to Dr. Sarah Lade, and really because some of the questions we have received from participants and those who registered for this program has been around the level of debt that Nigeria has. So the debt to GDP ratio remains moderate if you are looking at debt to GDP ratio, but our debt service to revenue ratio is very high, and it's reported that for Q1, it was even as high as 99%. So please, can you share with us what measures are being put in place to address these very important issues that is of concern to Nigerians?
Thank you very much. The debt to revenue is a problem. And again, back to the revenue issue. And I'm sure that's why the Fiscal Policy Roundtable also, was formed, so that this revenue issues can be solved. It's of concern to many people, but the government is doing a lot, and we have what we call the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, which is aimed at broadening revenue, aimed at increasing revenue of the, for the economy, and then diversifying the revenue base as well, so that it's not just the oil revenue, but we can tap revenue from other sources. So increasing revenue is one of the things we're trying to do, which is very important. And we are also trying as much as possible to reduce expenditure. We are trying to reduce inefficiencies. You just talked about, Jesmin just talked about inefficiencies, even in the tax system, even in other parts of the government as well. Reduction of inefficiency is one of the things that that engages us. So reducing expenditure, increasing revenue is what we're doing. So apart from looking for moratorium from loans or official partner, these are all short-term things. We can't keep doing that. The long-term, the most sustainable will be to be able to increase revenue generation so that we can grow the economy and then get up. And expenditure, quality of expenditure as well. What are we spending money on? So the little space that we have has been directed towards productive capital formation, things that will generate job and then generate future income, rather than expenditure that are just short term. So these are all part of things that the government is focusing on right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think it's very, very spot on in terms of our revenue base is very low. We need to get that up. but getting it up will be a marathon, it will not be a dash. What that means is, in the meantime, we just have to get more efficient with spending the little we have, including also rationalizing waivers, incentives, but also how the cost of running government. So I'll move on to the FRS chairman. One very important issue also highlighted from our study and responses from Nigerians is the reliability of data that we can use for national planning, but also for tax purposes. We know there are a number of countries around the world that, as a result of COVID-19, their interventions in terms of direct cash transfers to their citizens were done using tax records. But we couldn't do that in Nigeria because we don't have very reliable data that covers everybody that needs to be in the tax net. So the question is, what is the FRS doing, and what progress are we making to ensure that we not only deploy technology, but that those technology are working seamlessly and that we're able to harmonize national identities into one database to be able to promote data integrity?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Taiwo. I think let me start by making little comment on revenue efficiency and other things. First, I want us to understand that the key problem in Nigeria is that the tax-paying public do not have that tax-paying culture to pay taxes as they are due. Like you said, one of the key points I noted is the rationalization of waivers and incentive. If you observe even yesterday, we have to do a circular that you are in the process of collecting tax in this sector. There is another agency somewhere issuing a different incentive to the taxpayer, particularly even taxpayer in oil and gas. So those things are a bit strange, and these are things that I think are affecting our efficiency. Second issue that I want the IMF person to also note, and Dr. Sarah, because you are the one supervising us, is the issues of recognition. How do we recognize revenue that will constitute the basis for purpose of computing our GDP? What is obtainable now is law, because what we are emphasizing is just the collection by federal line revenue into federal account and that of the state internal revenue, which is slightly small, because you can see from the figure, His Excellency are giving the best ever gotten from the state is about 1.3 trillion. So I think these are the key issues. Otherwise, we are living in a country that has a lot of multiplicity of taxes that already exist. We are even thinking of how to harmonize it. So the key thing is the tax-paying culture. The second thing is rationalization of waivers and incentives, and that is what I insisted even in my circular yesterday. And we have to look for a way of recognizing what constitutes tax revenue to GDP. Having said that, I think let me come back to, when I come back to you, whatever we're going to do is all about collaboration, exchange of information with critical stakeholders for us to be able to achieve the reliability of the data you are talking about. But first thing we have done, like I've said in my presentation, is to deploy technology, because I think that is just the foundation that we have to lay. Of recent, we have gone to some agencies like NCC. We are currently working with NBC. We've signed MOU with NFIU. These are all things we are doing. We've also recently signed MOU with Nigeria NIDC, the NIMC, that is Nigeria for purpose of exchanging data. So if we do not do that, there is no way we're going to get data that can be used for purpose of any tax planning. I think we do not have the data, but government was able to do the little they were able to, they could do during the COVID-19 by coming up with a lot of support to businesses, even though it could not go to the taxpayers, but at least the citizens across, but at least the little they can do using the available data. I think government was able to do that. So what we are doing is to make sure that we make tax payment, tax remittance, tax filing, tax administration seamless by deploying technology, which I think we're spending a lot of money to do. I think going forward, that which you need as far as data are concerned, to be able to manage documentation issue, to be able to automate system, and we are doing a lot in that direction.
Thank you very much for that. We seem to be making progress, and that is good news. Hopefully, we don't pray for another crisis, but if anything happens, next time Nigerians want to get alerts on their bank using their tax records.
I think Dr. Sarah should note that, but because my own is to collect money for
Your
them
own is to collect money. She's the one to spend it. All right, very well noted. I'll move on to Jesmin, Rahman, and I really want you to please share your thoughts about Nigeria's debt position. I don't know whether to call it a crisis. And what do you think Nigeria can do to achieve revenue diversification? Because it seems like whenever anything happens to oil, everything just gets affected in Nigeria, including non-oil revenue. What are your thoughts?
Thank you. So let me start with debt. Nigeria's public debt stock at 29% of GDP as of end 2019. We would consider that moderate when we compare that to, let's say, the emerging and developing market average, which is about 53% of GDP. Now that 29% of GDP public debt include not just general government debt, but also CBN overdraft, AMCON debt, and various other things. So we want to be as broad as possible in terms of taking into account all of, overall public sector liabilities. When we do our in-depth analysis, public debt is projected to reach about 37% of GDP this year and remain roughly around that level in the medium term. We do various stress scenarios in our debt sustainability analysis. And in all of those scenarios, public debt does not go beyond 50% of GDP. So I would not say that public debt is having a crisis or that public debt is extremely high. It is really a revenue issue. Very low and volatile domestic revenue is what's, poses a lot of fiscal risks. And there are sizable financing risks in the next 12 months. It is good that there is high liquidity in the domestic market and very favorable borrowing costs currently, both in the short term for, the below 1 year maturity as well as longer term borrowing. And but going beyond the short term, there is a big Eurobond falling due in January. So eventually Nigeria will have to go to international market for borrowing. So that's where the vulnerability is, right? Before that happens, we need to make sure that the risk perception goes down significantly so that the borrowing costs are not as high as they are. That is the foreign, the international borrowing cost. So that's on debt. In terms of how to diversify the revenue base, I had mentioned about the VAT and CIT in my opening remarks. So those are definitely big ones. But there are also scope for other taxes. For example, excise. Excises on alcohol, tobacco, luxury goods, fossil fuels and pollution are among the most important pillars of tax revenue system around the world. And for Nigeria, excise yields very little at some 0.04%, coming from mostly tobacco and alcohol. So there are significant gains that can come from raising rates gradually to, let's say, ECOWAS levels, converting the ad valorem tax into specific tax rates, and broadening the base. There are also scope for subnational taxations in property and PIT. Property taxes are considered as a counter-cyclical, socially fair, and efficient tax, around the world. This is an sort of, if you like, this is an area that's not as much taken advantage of by developing countries, Nigeria inclusive. And this is somewhere where gains can come. PIT is another area. If you look at the PIT base, it's extremely narrow when you consider the large labor force. So this would be another area, where Nigeria could make tax gains. Of course, all of this takes time, as has been mentioned before. None of this is a dash; it's all a marathon. And we did some sort of illustrative calculation of what can come if Nigeria moves on all of these fronts in terms of revenue to GDP, from VAT, CIT, customs, excise, property taxation, etc. And Nigeria is able to lift its revenue level beyond that 12% threshold that I mentioned before, which is minimum for government to play an effective role, if they move in all of these fronts. So there is significant potential, the issues to complete the reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that we have the Director General for the Nigeria Governors Forum, Mr. A.B. Okaru. Are you able to confirm that you are here with us?
Yes, I'm here, struggling with connectivity.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to come back to you in a moment with one or two questions that you might be able to help us address, because there are quite a number of questions here that Nigerians would like the Governors Forum and governors and people that are leading us to attend to. I'll give you a moment, just settle down, and then I'll come back to you. I think the question I will ask now goes to the chairman of the FRS, who is also the chairman of the Joint Task Board. And this question, I believe, came from Tajuddin Karim, if I'm not mistaken. And his question is, why is it that the Joint Task Board does not have a coordinated approach towards how COVID-19 is being addressed in terms of tax measures? And is there anything that you're doing to ensure that there's some level of coordination?
Thank you. Mr. Tajuddin, the coordination is there, but all we have not done is that we did not, all we didn't do is that we did not issue a joint statement, because even in the course of putting the palliatives together for federal inland revenue, we had the course of having an online webinar like this with the chairman of internal revenue in the whole country. And we shared our view, the view that with them, and is together that we took a decision to do what we have done. But you can be rest assured that some of the states, the IGR base is low. But if you live in Lagos, you discover that most of the things we did in Lagos, my brother in the internal revenue in Lagos actually implemented them. So it is a uniform thing we have done, but the capacity by some of them to do it was not there. Number two, we equally have states that even did better than what we did. Like I think Enugu and Anambra, that even gave 20–30% of what was paid by taxpayers in 2019 back to them cash. So I think the internal revenue, which together with FIRA, which is the body called Joint Tax Board, the collaborative effort was discussed, and whatever we do at federal is exactly what we have agreed that they should do, but be depending on their own capacity.
Thank you very much for that response. Thank you very much for that. I'll come to the DG of the Nigerian Governors Forum, and there are two questions that are connected. One of it came from Ojo Sunday. And I'll ask the two together, like I said, because they are connected. One is as if there are some sets of rules and laws, including tax laws for Nigerians, and another set for politicians who decide whether they want to comply or not. So the question is, what can we do to get everyone to respect the law, pay their taxes? And then connected to that is, how can we ensure that Nigerian taxpayers start getting value in return for the taxes they pay? While you're trying to answer that, I want to put the Dr. Sarah Alade on notice. There's a question here for you, and you're going to go after the DG. And that question is, why is government not considering the VAT rate back to 5% for at least 1 year to stimulate consumption and increase individual disposable income at this time? But first, we take Mr. Okaro.
All right. All right. Thank you, moderator. I sincerely appreciate this opportunity. No, come on. Go. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, but there's a sound in the background, like a few.
Yeah, we are working on that. Just in a second, I'll get that sorted out. Okay, thank you. Now, the two questions. One, how do you get Nigerians to respect the law? I mean, that's a dicey one.
Yeah, particularly politicians.
I just think that the absence of trust, I mean, and the fact that laws have not been applied uniformly across board. I mean, it's been tough for people to appreciate the utility of respecting laws. But otherwise, ordinarily Nigerians are law-abiding people. If leaders do the right thing, they would naturally follow. You can see what's been happening with the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, the governors have shown a lot of leadership, there's been a lot of coordination at the center. All the governors have done, they've worked together, so it's been some kind of coordinated response on their part. I will tell you that in the past 2.5 months, governors have met through teleconference channels 11 times, all focused on the challenges faced by the COVID-19. I mean, I think that should be given. People have respected the regulations and laws, and the outcome of the engagement with stakeholders and the presidential task force on COVID-19 has been wonderful. Right now, the states are doing a lot of work with development partners, the World Bank, the FID, and a number of other development agencies to get some more funding to get this done correctly. The other question with respect to value for tax, the pay. Again, I'm happy the tax chief executive for the country is on this call, because part of their responsibility is to track the use of funds collected. You know, I think the chairman is done well, is taking off well, trying to understand the environment and putting a system in place to help drive that. Ensuring that, because technically the contract between the governed and those who govern is the tax is rooted in the tax. We should be able to show, governments should be able to show what they do with revenues collected. I mean, so again, I will tell you that a number of the governors, a number of the states have over time, they now understand that it's important you professionalize your entire tax system. It's important you deal less with consultants. I mean, in trying to raise revenue. It's important you automate your tax administration system, and it's important you do a number of things. I mean, that wasn't the case before. I mean, so I just think COVID-19, there are opportunities around it. I mean, it created its own challenges, but it's you find governors now, leaders sitting down to really think and work and I see the country benefiting from this, and every other person just working around this. So thank you. Listen, I have my colleague. I mean, maybe if there's a second question, that's extensively done a lot of work in this area, David. I'll probably direct 1 or 2 questions to him if need be. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we only have 4 minutes left for this session, so I'll kindly ask Dr. Sarah Alade to answer that question on VAT in 1 minute. So each of the panelists can have 30 seconds for their closing remark, and we can be on time to close in the next 4 minutes.
Taiwo, what was the question?
Please, why can't we reduce VAT back to 5%, at least for 1 year?
I think we have just, that personally, now that's speaking personally as Sarah Alade, not the minister, I think it's a new law, and you don't want it dead on arrival. Why don't we just implement it? We already have relief measures from other sources, I mean, other fiscal measures rather than the VAT. I would have thought we should just see it through, see how we can, implement it, and make sure that it's something that really takes hold before we start giving, reverting back to 5% this year, next year again, we then go back to 7.5, or when do we go back to 7.5? So I believe that being a new law, we should just allow it to go through. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, very well said. Maybe in addition to that, also to say that the Honourable Minister for Finance, Budget and National Planning released a VAT modification order recently, exempting about 878 items from this VAT. And a lot of it is to do with food items, so which means that majority of Nigerians should be okay not paying the VAT. So I would kindly request that each panelist keep their closing comments to just 30 seconds. If there's anything else you want to tell us that you've not been able to say, and I'll start with the chairman of the FRS.
Thank you once more. I think the question that Dr. Sarah just answered came from an Oliver Twist. So we shouldn't mind the person who asked that question. The law is just new, like she said, and that same law has taken away 60% of our tax base, in addition to the VAT modification order that has removed over 800 items from the chargeable items. On a final note, what we are trying to do at FRS is to carry out reforms. We do not want to make much noise about it. We want the result of the reform to speak for us. And we are also modernizing the tax administration process. And currently we are working on certain amendment to our Establishment Act, which we hope to be able to submit to our supervisory ministry, the Ministry of Finance, for onward submission to National Assembly at the point of submitting our 2021, the national 2021 budget estimate. Our intention, our plan is to focus on indirect taxes, which is the VAT that people want the rate to come down, because this is just the best way to go. We will work for a situation whereby, if possible, the threshold for exemption of income tax is improved from 25 million to another figure upward, but in a situation whereby we remove that threshold for purpose of VAT, because what is obtainable today, sir, is that we have people that are charging VAT, yet they don't remit. because they say they're not within the threshold. So it's a big, big challenge. Jesmin has raised a lot of issues which I have noted. We are equally working on it, but we do not want to make them public. One of it is carbon emission tax. We have a committee currently working on that. We have a committee also working on haulage tax. We do not want to make money, make noise on much of these things because they are not yet law. And you know Nigerians, by the time you made them known to them, they will just sue you to court and say FRS must stop. But thank you for
okay,
that.
so okay, thank you very much for that. I'll just ask Jesmin to say a few words if there's anything you want to say as closing remarks. 30 seconds.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure to be part of this. Maybe final remarks. We are very encouraged by the 2019 finance bill. Let's seize the energy and momentum. Hard to do in the current COVID-19 circumstances, but let's do it anyway to make sure that we complete the revenue administration and tax policy reforms to put the fiscal house on very strong foundation. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Dr. Sarah Alade. Okay, so thank you. I'd like to, I think maybe she stepped out. I'd like to thank all our panelists for the excellent contributions. Okay, yes.
You just want me to run?
Yes, your closing comment in 30 seconds.
Yes, the revenue mobilization, revenue generation is a responsibility for all, not just government alone. The government is doing its best to make sure that they broaden the base for revenue, and like I said, reduce expenditure and so on. So, but if citizens also participate by paying taxes and then by doing the right things, I'm sure it will go a long way in solving our problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam, and thank you to all our panelists, as well as His Excellency who had to leave at noon. We appreciate you for your contributions. We have more questions. We're going to be directing them to you so we can share the responses with our participants online subsequently. So we'll then move on quickly to try and close the session. And the next item on our agenda is what we call the call to action. And what I want to do here is in about 3 minutes, quickly present the feedback we got from participants. And this is to do with the, we asked participants to revalidate the study we had done before. And these are the top 10 items that Nigerians selected. In the area of policy, Nigerians want government. These are the most important issues to Nigerians. Government at all levels should publish revenue collection data annually by type of tax, number of taxpayer, and cost of collection. Political leaders and MDA should be fully compliant with tax laws and demonstrate this to the public. Taxation should be clearly linked to the provision and improvements in the quality of public infrastructure and social services. And from legislation, government should amend the law to resolve ambiguous and draconian provisions. Government should amend the constitution to clarify the taxing powers of the various tiers of government to eradicate overlapping jurisdiction that result in multiple taxation. And full and effective compliance with tax obligations should be a precondition for political offices. In the area of administration, Nigerians want us to utilize a single central base for data collection and harmonize all identities like NIN, TIN, BVN, and so on and so forth. And tax authorities should embrace professionalism with continuous training and development for their tax officials across all levels. And tax authorities should adopt technology, make sure they work, and measure the usage by Nigerians, and continuously improve on those systems. And all of these, policy, legislation, and admin, are to rest on number 10, which is the foundation, and that is governance, transparency, and accountability. So on this note, I'd like to invite to give us the closing remark. That is Dr. Suleiman A. Indanusa, who is the Commissioner and Co-Chair for the Fiscal Policy Roundtable. Over to you, sir, for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Taiwo, for the excellent moderating activity. Honourable Minister on Finance, Budget and National Planning, represented by our able, our own Sarah Alade, Doctor, who was the immediate past chairman of the Fiscal Policy Roundtable. Distinguished panelists, the chairman of NESG, the CEO, the moderator, ladies and gentlemen. As we bring this webinar to a close, I would like to say what a pleasure it has been to be part of this important event. I'm sure the audience will agree with me that it was a lively and stimulating discussion. At a web gathering of such eminent people from different parts of the world, I consider it a great privilege and honor to be entrusted with the undertaking to give a closing remark. Let me start by thanking the NESG, our host, for putting this event together. As you know, the NESG has over the years come to be known for evidence-based policy advocacy, promotion of public-private policy dialogue, effective and purposeful collaboration with experts and development partners. It is therefore not surprising that the NESG has brought these spectacular panelists together by our dynamic, which includes the governor of Ekiti and also our very dynamic Minister of Finance. You see, I have this nagging premonition that Nigeria will get over our current economic challenges sooner than we think. Listening to the speakers today, I also agree that going forward, our economy must change in profound ways. As we have heard over the past few hours, there is plenty to reflect upon regarding points made in Nigeria's fiscal sustainability, its imperative, impediments, and options. Pending your personal deeper reflection, permit me to quickly state some overriding messages from today's deliberation. One, Bill and Melinda Gates have always and will always remain a worthy partner in the project of NESG and Nigeria. And among other supports they've been given to Nigeria, they are very, very well known in the promotion of human development, support public finance, blocking revenue leakages, strengthening social contracts between government and people, and unlocking new sources of revenue. In the course of the discussions, we've also been told what Nigeria should do as a result of the survey of NESG Fiscal Roundtable in the form of recommendations that comprise the need for social exchange, simplicity, communication, capacity and transparency and accountability in our tax administration and policy. Discussing with the governors, we also heard that the subnationals are upping their game because of the necessity of the times. They are upping the social contract at the subnational level. And of course, making sure that they are keeping tax administration as simple as they can. And of course, implementing the government itself at the Federal Ministry of Finance and other stakeholders are trying to implement the Finance Act of 2019. Even though it's difficult, they are doing their best. Among other things they are doing is to regulate petroleum prices, power sector reforms, external funding, and debt relief. As far as FIRS is concerned, technology is it. They are, for you to be transparent, accountable, they are launching massive technology into their activities so that this can work and become more seamless. They are increasing their engagement of taxpayers, simplifying tax payments, and so many other reforms are in the offing. Interestingly, the IMF, that has been our promising partner among other partners, have come up with a very interesting thing that the most important is raising revenue, and then it has to be efficiently raised and efficiently used. There has to be reform in revenue administration, improve perception of governance, and also build tax base and modernize tax administration generally. We have also heard from other questioners, which are very, very interesting in the area of the level of debt, reliability of data, debt revenue diversification, and other issues, including VAT, CIT, and how we can continue to build a revenue defense in the space of having huge debt and so many other challenges. But the general thing that one can get from this discussion is that at this point in time, it is revenue that we must build in order to be able to find it a lot easier to tackle a lot of the problems, including debt and others that we need to do. But to do that, we need all the stakeholders to come together, and that exactly is what NESG is known to be good at, trying to bring stakeholders, partners together, so that together as Nigeria and our partners, we look at ways of mitigating all the risks, the revenue risks, the debt risks, and development risks that Nigeria faces. On that note, I want to once again thank one of the brightest fiscal minds that we have in Nigeria, who is our moderator, that is Taiwo, for doing a very, very beautiful job in moderating this session. I want to thank you. God bless you guys for coming, and I wish you all the best. Enjoy yourselves as you leave this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And then with this, we have come to the end of the virtual conference. Thank you for joining us. Even though the conference has come to an end, the conversation continues. You should follow us at official NESG. We have two videos, one on better tax and the other one on call to action. You will find them on the YouTube channel, as well as our other social media handles and the website of the NESG. Please pay your taxes and do hold government to account by asking questions. May God bless you, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Bye for now, and God bless you.
Amen. Thank you, Taiwo.
Thank you very much, sir.